Welcome to the Valley Center Theater's presentation of Portrait of Emma. We are privileged to hear two of the songs written by Joseph and Emma Smith's son, David Hiram Smith, born after the martyrdom of the prophet. The first song, Let Us Pray for Each Other, will be heard before the performance. The second, Worldly Cares, will be at the end of the performance. Both songs are sung by Eugene Kovalenko.
Let us pray for one another, for the day is fading fast, and the night is growing darker, while the scourge goes flaming past. We can sit in the darkness, closing round the narrow way, and the snares are growing thicker for each other. Let us pray. We are walking down time's vision. We are very near the end. Let us pray that God the Father will His guiding Spirit send. Now the foe becomes more daring, knowing well the latter day. 'Tis the strength of his despairing, for each other let us pray. Pray in faith, and pray unceasing, to the God we love and trust. For our prayers are much availing, if we walk upright and just. Be not weary of exhorting, heed the lesson of each day, and that we may be unwavering for each other. Let us pray. It is waning on toward midnight, soon we'll hear the watchman say, see, the Son of God is coming, go and meet him on the way. That our lamps may then be burning, bright enough to guide our way, and that we may share his glory for each other. Let us pray.
Hello. I am delighted that you came. For I know how very difficult it was for some of you to make the arrangements. And I hope that your evening will prove to be as enjoyable as I know mine shall be. Oh, I have here a picture of my father's farm. The story I wish to share with you all began right here. It was July 10th, 1804. And the early morning sun streamed warmly over the eastern hills and bathed the little farmhouse in rose and gold. A simple one it was, and the emphasis of honest comfort. Cows were filing slowly out of the log barn into the rail-fenced pasture, plump and content. They waded knee-deep into the sweet red clover. Smoke curled skyward from the little clay and stone chimney of the house, and the door was open, and a woman's voice was heard calling from within. Voices answered, and the morning was well underway. I, Emma Hale, had arrived into this world. my father, Isaac Hale. He was a tall, muscular man of 46 years, and his ancestors were English to the core. Well, Father was actually more of a hunter than of a farmer, but he felt with his growing family to support, the stable life of farming was his best choice. And my mother, Elizabeth, she was also English. She was a kind, gentle woman with much wisdom. A neighbor once said of her, "I never come away from talking to Elizabeth that I do not feel I have learned something." After their marriage in 1790, Father and Mother made the 225-mile journey from Wells, Vermont to Wellingborough, now Harmony, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. And here is where they were living when I was born. My father was a pioneer, but he hoped his pioneering days were over. He was content now to stay at home. He had watched with many others the framing of the Constitution of the United States of America. I can just hear him now. Can it actually mold 13 jealous, quarrelsome colonies into one? Well, for 17 years, Father had watched, and the experiment seemed to be working. The first president of the United States, Father's old commander-in-chief, George Washington, had served well, and to the surprise of many, had no desire whatever to be king. Well, now Thomas Jefferson was president, and his integrity was known well. In 1804, the territory of the United States grew tremendously, almost overnight, for Napoleon, needing more money for his war with Spain, had sold to Jefferson for a comparatively small sum the vast land of the Mississippi Valley. "Oh, what a country!" Father had said. He was content to remain at home, but what of us, his children? He would ask frequently. "Where in this huge, raw territory will you settle? And what part will you play in the building of this vast land?" Well, at that time, Father could not have guessed what life would bring for us, his children. My earliest recollections were that of swinging in the swing that Father made us. It hung in the old elm tree right outside of our kitchen window. Oh, and I remember I was quite a good companion to my brothers while hunting for lizards in the woodpile. "There's one, Alva, right there, see? Oh, there's another. Gone? Where? On my leg? Oh, stop it, Alva, you're such a tease." And then I remember helping my mother prepare the evening meals, and from those experiences I became quite a good cook at a considerably young age. Probably the dearest memories of all were that of running to meet Father as he would come home from the fields. And I remember I would run toward him, and he would whisk me up into his strong, large arms and carry me toward the house. And I remember thinking, with a love like this, what else could ever be of more importance? As I grew into a young lady, I had the rare opportunity of attending a young woman's finishing school. Well, it was located some distance from home, and so my parents gave me permission to live away that year. And I lived at a boarding school situated near the school. And I do believe that it was through the experiences that I gained that year and the independency that helped me so many times throughout the trials of my life. Well, the next few years brought about some of the most important decisions of my life. It all started when I first met Joseph. Well, Joseph had taken up employment at Josiah Stoll's, and Father was Mr. Stoll's nearest neighbor and best friend. And that is why why he had agreed to let the young men board at our home. And so it was one late October afternoon when the maple trees were crimson and golden in the glow of the setting sun, that a group of young men came plodding along the road together. They were tired and hungry and hoping for a good meal that night. And at the head of the company of men walked Father. He had gone over to the Stoll farm, a gesture of courtesy, to escort the young men home. Well, Mother, she greeted them cordially at the door, and I was tending to an open kettle on the fire. The men should enjoy this meal tonight, I thought. And Father came up beside me and said, Emma, I would like you to meet Mr. Joseph Smith. I remember as I turned, I saw standing before me a tall, broad-shouldered young man, not quite out of his teens, but near my same age. Oh, his face was frank and open, and he smiled gently. He had the kindest blue eyes I had ever seen. How do you do, sir? I said shyly. And suddenly, he too became very shy, for he quickly said, your servant, ma'am. Well, as the October days grew shorter and the evenings longer, Joseph and I often took a short stroll down the turnpike under the clear moon and bright stars, and we would talk, as young people do, about the serious things of life. Well, you see, a young woman could only prepare for one career, marriage. But a young man, why, he could follow any one of many occupations. And that is why I asked, with an interest deeper than my heart would allow me to admit, just what he intended to do with his life. Well, at first he did not answer, and thinking he hadn't heard, I turned quickly to repeat my question. There in the moonlight, I saw his face. It was pale and strained, and his eyes were glowing, yet they were full of tears. I am not certain, Miss Hale, just what my life's work will be. I think it probable, however, that I should be some sort of a minister. I have something I wish to tell you. I wanted to tell you for some time now. And what I say will sound strange, but please believe it to be the truth. Joseph then became completely unaware of me. And he told me the story of the two visions he had had. Oh, I remember at first I was frightened. As he continued to talk, I too was caught up with that same beautiful spirit which seemed to be upon me. And so you see, Miss Hale, I have a work that I must do. I cannot disappoint God of all he asks of me. Do you believe me, Miss Emma? I felt my soul strangely stirred. I knew I had been deeply moved by the Spirit of God during the recent days of the religious awakening. And now, I felt that this young man that stood beside me had indeed seen and talked with God. Yes, Joseph, I do believe you. I believe every word. Later that night, I sat in my room for a long time. As the candle burned low, I remember taking a shawl, wrapping it about me against the cold. What I had heard this night had shaken me to the very core of my being. And yet I believed it to be perfectly true. How sweet Joseph had been. And he had not dwelt overly on the persecution that he had suffered, but the relief and the joy that came into his expression when I told him I believed him. For evidence to me his word had not always been accepted. I was so happy, and I remember I wanted my parents to hear this from Joseph's own lips. It did not occur to me that they would doubt it. I still remember hearing Father's very words after listening to Joseph's story. Sir, what you say may be true. I am not the man to say that it is not. But I do say that it doesn't sound so to me, and I will thank you not to speak of it again in our home. I understand that you will soon be leaving the Stoll farm, that your work will be over, and you will be returning to your home in York State. Good night to you, sir. My mother and my father and all of my brothers and sisters chose to believe the cruel, evil things that were being said of Joseph, instead of taking the time to learn what was in his heart. Oh, I must admit that at first I had my apprehensions too. I found myself wondering, am I so interested in Joseph the man that I'm foolishly ignoring everything else? However, I did not entertain those thoughts for long, because I knew from the very first moment we became acquainted, we had a very special relationship. And when it came time for Joseph to leave, we had a clear understanding of our feelings. Because of Father's hostility, we did not make any plans for the future, other than to write as often as possible. And Joseph returned to his home in York State for almost a year, and he wrote once a month as promised. He had the mail sent to the home of a friend of mine, because in my father's home did not speak his name. Well, finally it came time for Joseph to come for me, and I was visiting friends, the same friends that where he had sent my correspondence. Well, when Joseph saw me, he put the question to me simply. Emma, you know that I love you. I have told you what my parents' home is like, and I have tried to show you as clearly as I am able to see at present which way my life may turn. I would be happy and honored if you would marry me. Oh, that joy flooded my heart. Almost at once, doubt assailed me. For I realized it had to be Joseph or my family. And I loved them both. Oh, I knew Father was only interested in my security and what he thought was my happiness. But in my heart, I knew the only happiness that I needed was the love that Joseph and I shared. Well, we knew that we would never have my parents' consent for our marriage, even though Joseph was 21 and I would be 23 on my next birthday. So Joseph called for me the following morning, and he helped me into the carriage, and he put a warm soapstone at my feet. And that afternoon, we were married at the home of the Justice of the Peace, Squire Tardy. January 18th, 1827. Oh, and Joseph joked later that surely when my parents found out about the marriage, there would be a regular hailstorm going on in their home. I was immediately accepted into the Smith home, and I immediately felt a genuine affection for Father Smith and warm-hearted, loyal Lucy. Well, Joseph said it was my quiet manner and willingness to serve that won their admiration quickly. Well, you see, I had been trained well by my mother, and it wasn't long until my bread and churned butter tasted as delicious as Lucy's own. Kind, gentle Lucy. She did always regard me with much love and respect. Well, in the Smith home, Joseph's religious experiences were thought of as real and treated as such. And I could discuss them freely and openly. And where they never lost their beauty or spiritual quality, I found myself anxiously awaiting the time when Joseph would be allowed to take the plates from where he had seen them. It was late one evening, September 21st. I remember I changed into my long black riding habit, and I tiptoed across the kitchen floor as not to awaken Father and Mother Smith. And Joseph was waiting outside in a borrowed wagon from Joseph Knight's farm. And we rode quickly and silently along the road toward the hill. When we arrived at the hill, Joseph left me in the wagon, and he took the lantern. And I watched it go higher and higher up the hill until finally it was stopped, lowered, still. I was trembling, but not from fear, but feeling of unreality and awe. Finally, Joseph returned to the wagon, and I remember as he climbed into the wagon, I took the reins, for in his arms he was carrying something very heavy, wrapped in a piece of towel sacking. And again, we did not speak on the way home, but shared in that same beautiful spirit. Well, it must have been midnight when we left the hill behind. To my keen disappointment, Joseph did not show me the plates. Oh, he said he had been instructed not to show them to anyone, and he wanted to be true to his trust. And then he took my hand in his, and he said, "Emma, you have taken so much on faith. Can you take this also, my darling?" Well, I could have seen them frequently if I'd wished, for they were simply kept in our room in the box that Alvin had made us. And then later, when Joseph was translated, they were kept on a table with simply a linen cloth covering them. Joseph's absolute confidence in my honesty consoled me greatly. Well, it seemed that once we brought the plates home, that all the powers of hell was directed against us. Everyone was certain we did not have the plates, but yet their energies and efforts, all of their energies and efforts, were still trying to get them from us. And for the first time in new fear, myself and my husband and his family, living in the midst of stark drama, greed and ruthlessness. Time and time again they had to be secreted them from those who sought them. And once, when the family having been warned just in time, we hid them beneath the hearth plate as a group of ruffians knocked at the door and demanded entrance. And then Joseph hid them in a hollow birch log once in the woods. And thrice on the way home he was attacked by men laying in wait for him. And then there was the time that I rode 10 miles on horseback as fast as I could go to warn Joseph of the danger of the place. That's when I was carrying our first child. I had ridden my parents regularly since my marriage, trying to remain as close to them as they would allow. Well, I had no idea that it was the news of my approaching motherhood, but one day my brother Alvin arrived at the Smith barn bearing the astonishing news that Father wanted Joseph and I to pay him a long visit. Well, you're right. Joseph wasn't very anxious about being a guest in Father's home. And one time, during an interview, he was asked, "Brother Joseph, I understand you stole your wife. Is that true?" And Joseph just joked and smiled back and said, "She is of age, brother. Why don't you ask her?" Joseph saw my wistful happiness at the invitation, and he decided to go. Oh, and I was so relieved because then we could begin the work. We would not be subject to the persecution we had been in Palmyra. And again, my Joseph was inspired, for as we left Palmyra, he took the ancient record and the Urim and Thummim, and he placed them in the bottom of a large barrel, and then he filled the barrel with beans. Shortly out of Palmyra, we were stopped by a mob of men who insisted they go through our belongings, looking for the golden plates. And all they found were beans. Even though my brother Alvin never did join the church, I believe it was that experience that he had this change of heart. For he helped Joseph and I so many times after that. Well, when we arrived in Harmony, we found peace again. Well, Joseph was treated courteously by Father, though with reserve. I suppose that in his way, Father was even kind. But I became serenely happy, and Mother and I, we spent many hours in deep companionship, making the finely tucked little garment for the little one we all awaited. Well, shortly after this, Joseph and I purchased 13 acres of farmland from Father, and on it was a little cabin. It wasn't much more than just a roof over our heads, but it was ours, and we scrubbed the floors and we scrubbed the walls, and borrowed furniture was carried through the door, and it soon became our first real home. There was so much work to do in those days, and especially Joseph. Well, you see, he had to help Father with the farm work in order to pay for our land and cabin. But then every spare minute that Joseph had, he spent with his precious riding. Well, Joseph wrote for some weeks, and then he realized that, well, the work would go much more quickly if he had someone to write the words as he dictated. And so he wrote to Martin Harris and asked him to be his scribe. Well, Martin Harris was a well-to-do farmer and friend of Father Smith's, who had insisted we take $50 before leaving Palmyra. Upon receiving Joseph's letter, he was completely delighted with the prospect of becoming Joseph's scribe, and he quickly put his business affairs in order and left for Harmony. Arriving in April, by June 12th, he had written 116 pages of foolscap. Well, shortly after this, Martin desired to go home and to take his family a visit and see how the farm work was progressing. And wishing to take some evidence of the work that he was engaged in, he asked Joseph if he may take a few pages of the manuscript with him. Well, Joseph refused point blank. But Martin was persistent. And upon Martin's persistence, Joseph finally took the matter to the Lord in prayer. He was forbidden to let any portion of the manuscript go. And the second season of prayers brought about the same answer. But Martin was persistent, and well, Joseph and I both liked Martin, and we realized once the work would be completed, he would be involved. And Martin being 22 years Joseph's senior, we knew he was responsible. And so one more time, Joseph took the matter to the Lord. And he was told that Martin may take manuscript with him, providing he show it to none others than the 5 he had named, all being members of his family. And so the next day, Martin left happily with the evidence of his work with him. And it was just 3 days later that a little son was born to us. We named him Alva, after my brother who helped us get to Harmony. Our joy was brief, for he died the same day. He was buried on a beautiful spot on the edge of Father's farm. I was left very weak and desperately ill. And my Joseph never left my side. A more kind, loving man never lived than my Joseph. Well, as I began to rally and grow in strength, Joseph's burden of worry for me was being lifted. But it was being replaced with a different anxiety, one that started out as a mild wonder, but grew daily into an agonizing certainty. Well, you see, Martin Harris's date of return had come, and Joseph had heard nothing. So Joseph left Harmony and arrived in Manchester to find Martin sick at heart. He had broken his promise, and he had shown the manuscript to others than the 5 he had named. He did not know how, but they had been stolen and were not recovered. And Joseph, he felt more guilty than Martin. And then upon returning to Harmony, he found that Father's resentment had grown with the increase of his work. You see, Father had expected more help from Joseph, and instead he had spend many hours with his precious writing. And then we had the ancient record and the Urim and Thummim taken from us because Joseph had failed to accept the Lord's decision. Poor Joseph. It was a very difficult time for him. But one day he came through the door of the cabin and told me that the ancient record and the Urim and Thummim had been returned to him, and he was forgiven. Well, now he could go on with his work, and work we did. It was shortly after that Joseph came through the door of the cabin and told me because I had a good, clear handwriting that he wanted me to write a few days. Oh, I was speechless with delight, for I realized how important it was not to lose one single word. It is my belief that the Book of Mormon is of divine authenticity. I have not the slightest doubt, for no man could have translated it without being inspired. Why, my Joseph would dictate for hours, and I would write. And after a meal or an interruption, he would return, and without ever asking to see any portion of it or have any part of it read back to him, he would immediately begin where he had left off. It is improbable that a learned man could have done this, much less one so unlearned as my Joseph. It was April 15, 1829, and a knock came to the door, and who do you think it was? Oliver Cowdery. Now, Oliver was a school teacher and had been a boarder at Father Smith's farm. And upon hearing about the work that Joseph was engaged in, he traveled quickly to Harmony to see if it was true for himself. And being an excellent penman, he soon became Joseph's next scribe. However, after the persecution became too great there, Oliver and Joseph and I were forced to leave our little home. And we went to live with the highly respected German family and friends of Father Smith's, the Whitmers. Oh, they were good people, and they cast their lot wholeheartedly into the work. And it was shortly after this that Joseph was told by the Lord that he should show the place to 3 others, and they would become special witnesses that they had seen them. Oh, I was so relieved. You can imagine. I was so relieved that someone else other than Joseph would finally see them. And then later, 8 others were shown them. I, however, never did see them. Well, it was August of that same year that the manuscript was finally completed. And April 6, 1830, the church was organized in the home of the Whitmers. Oh, in that June, I was baptized. I was baptized in a pond made by damming up a stream near Joseph Knight's home in Colesville, New York. And then that same June, we held the first conference of the church, and there were 30 members in attendance. Oh, people flocked to the new movement. But again, with success came persecution. try to convince the ministers not to speak. That's the same year that I received my very special blessing. I read it so often. I would like to read it to you. Hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God, while I speak unto thee, Amihail. A revelation I give unto thee concerning thy will. Behold, thy sins are forgiven thee, and thou art an elect lady, whom I have called. Murmur not because of the things I have not seen, for they are withheld from thee, from the world which is in my wisdom at this time. And the office of thy calling shall be for a comfort unto my servant Joseph Smith Jr., thy husband, in his afflictions with consoling words, in the spirit of meekness. And it shall be given thee also to make a selection of sacred hymns, as it shall be given thee which is pleasing unto me to be had in my church. For my soul delighteth in the heart, yea, the song of the righteous is a prayer unto me. Well, I immediately began to gather a selection of sacred hymns, but due to my household responsibilities and my other obligations, I was unable to have it published until 5 years later. Oh, I was especially pleased with the title page. It read, A Collection of Sacred Hymns for the Church of the Latter-day Saints, selected by Emma Smith. Well, the persecution had not ceased, and now it was seriously beginning to affect many of the members of the church, including the new converts. Joseph received revelation from the Lord, directing that the entire membership should make preparation to move to Ohio. Oh, and it was accepted warmly by all. For you see, it did not matter what great sacrifice we had to sell our homes. We had the hope that in Ohio we would find our peace. And Kirtland was a lovely little town. Joseph was home often to converse with me and to play with the children. And we sent many members out on missions without purse or script. And hundreds of converts came into the church. Oh, Joseph and I felt such love for those new members. Oh, yes. And Brother Brigham came into the church at that time. Outspoken Brother Brigham. Some say the reason we did not get along well was because we were too much alike. But don't you believe that one. Well, Father Smith and Lucy had joined us in Kirtland now, and I was very grateful, for I deeply felt the need of a mother. It was after a very difficult time that twins, oh, a little boy and a girl were born to us. They were born dead. Oh, I remember that I regained physically well enough. The ache in my heart was great. It was about a week after the babies were born Joseph came to sit with me. And he seemed to have something important to say. He told me that on the same day that our little ones had died, that Sister Murdoch had given birth to twins also, a boy and a girl. But something had gone wrong, and Sister Murdoch had died. Oh, my first thoughts were of the 5 little ones she left behind. And then how could Brother Murdoch care? Joseph! Oh, Joseph, do you suppose that he would let us take them? Only until he could care for them himself. The next day, Joseph and Lucy brought home the motherless little babies. Oh, they were healthy and strong, and they were Joseph's and mine to keep. I remember I was still too weak to hold them home, but I took the little boy in my arms. I could feel the warmth of his tiny little body next to mine. And I looked down into his little red face for a long time. And then I remember looking up to smile at Joseph. I noticed he was completely unaware of us, for with tears rolling down his cheeks, he was looking at his new little daughter in Lucy's arms. When Joseph and I were alone, he told me, "Oh, Emma, sometimes I wish my calling would been that of other men, so that I could be home with you and the children more. But I cannot be, if I am to accomplish all that God has for me to do. Emma, I want you to know that wherever I go, you are in my heart and in my prayers. Distance, my darling, shall never separate us." The winter passed quickly that year, and although the March winds were chilly and the evenings icy, the snow was beginning to melt. And I would take the twins out of doors and trundle them about in the little wooden wagon that Joseph had made for them. Then they became very feverish and desperately ill with the measles. Oh, I was a good nurse, and Joseph and I took care of them in turn. And at length, they seemed to be getting better. I remember it was one late night in March, and Joseph had finally gotten the little boy settled down. And as he laid him into the trundle bed, Joseph, being fully dressed and completely exhausted, he flung himself down beside the baby. And soon they were both fast asleep. Joseph and the torches off into the night. Quickly stirred up the dying fire. And then I cared for the little one. Oh, there. Don't cry. Everything will be all right. All right. Who's there? Oh, Brother Jones. The neighbors quickly drew across the heavy iron bar which held the door locked, and they entered. The women strove to comfort me. The men rode off after the intruders. The neighbors had been awakened by the noise. You see, they had also seized another brother and taken him no one knew where. Finally, Joseph returned. He had been beaten, tarred, and left unconscious. He had regained consciousness and found his way home. I quickly drew the hot water from the crane of the fire. And with the help of the other women, we began to scrape the tar from his skin. We did so until the following morning. And he was left red and scarred. The next day, Joseph preached a sermon and he baptized 3 people. Sidney Rigdon remained at home. He had been drugged by the heels across stony ground and his head was very badly battered. I, too, remained at home. I was utterly spent with exhaustion. What have we done? Any of us? That we could not live in peace. The next morning, I cared for the little boy. Oh, his fever was very high, and his little body racked with a harsh cough. I knew this was much more serious than the measles. He was cared for by the doctor. Hands were laid upon him for healing. Nothing helped. On Friday, he died. Four babies dead in less than 4 years. I later learned that I would bear another child in the fall. And fear struck my whole being. But Joseph took my hand in his. Oh, Emma, these little ones, it has been heartbreaking. But my darling, I feel certain that this baby will live to grow up. Now, what do you think we ought to call him? What do you think of Joseph? It was November 6th that little Joseph was born. And he had my eyes and soft brown hair. And he was healthy and lusty from the beginning. And gradually we began to hope he would remain with us. And later on, 2 more sons were born to us, Frederick and Alexander. It was March 27th, 1836, that the Kirtland Temple was dedicated. I remember because by 8 o'clock in the morning, crowds had begun to form. And by 9 o'clock, the building was filled to capacity. Oh, I shall never forget that day. The days and the weeks and the months that followed were filled with persecution, fear, and constant danger. Oh, yes, often we were asked to leave our little homes. We would take what belongings we could get into the wagons and just leave the rest. And often we had to travel in the dead winter and in the middle of the night. And sometimes we would arrive at our destination to find the situation worse there than the one we had left behind. So it was when we went to Missouri. And from Missouri, we went into Illinois. And the spot we decided to settle in Illinois, we called Nauvoo. There were some peaceful, pleasant days in Nauvoo. And Joseph was home often with us to spend time with his family. And I watched with my prophet husband the building of the City Beautiful. And on parade days, I rode beside my handsome husband because, you see, he was the lieutenant general, and that also meant he was the head of the Nauvoo Legion. Oh, yes, and when our mansion house was almost completed, it was I that was chosen to journey to the city to select the furnishings. Oh, we needed so many things. We needed the draperies and the carpeting and, well, all of the furnishings. I took friends and we went by ferry. And although money was of no consequence then, I'm afraid my old habits came back and I spent each amount prayerfully. But it was when that shopping was almost completed, oh, that I saw the most beautiful bonnet I had ever seen. Oh, how I did want to purchase it. How elegant it was. How exquisite. Oh, but upon inspecting my old one, oh, I did find that it had many years' use and still was very serviceable, so I did not purchase the new one. But I remember how I wished that when I was on that ferry, a wind would have just come along and blown my old one off right into the water. And one of the highlights of my life came March 17th, 1842, when I, Emma Smith, was selected to be president of the Nauvoo Female Relief Society organization. Oh, I said at that time, we will do extraordinary things. And look at us, we have. Well, seldom was there a table set in the mansion house that friends and Guests like yourself were not invited to enjoy the bounties of the earth and the delicious food prepared by myself. It was January 18th, 1843, and Joseph and I celebrated our 16th anniversary. Even though we were the host and host, we served the tables. Let me see, there were 4 in all. 21 sat down at the first, 20 at the second, 19 at the third, including Joseph and myself, and 15 at the fourth, including the other members of the household and the children. That was such a wonderful evening. It lasted until 2 in the morning. Although the happiness was great, I could not help but have that feeling, for happiness would not last. All of the trials of my life, the most difficult one came when Joseph received the revelation from the Lord, introduced the practice of plural marriage to the church. Half of the time I believed it to be a commandment of God, and then the other half I did not. You see, I have been raised with the highest of standards and principles. It's against everything that I had ever been taught. Hiram talked to Joseph one day and told him, if the commandment were written down and presented it to me, that way perhaps I would know that it was of the Lord. And Joseph warned Hiram that he did not know me as well as Joseph did. Well, the day Hiram presented it to me, I remember I tore it in 100 pieces and threw it back at him. And then he got the thrashing of his life. It was not easy to be the wife of the prophet. It was to usher in the last dispensation. And my greatest fear was that for Joseph, it would undo everything that he had accomplished. Oh, and the things that were said of him, the things that were written about him, by men who did not understand it, it could be a commandment of God. And then came the time that Joseph was arrested for treason. Oh, he was innocent, and everyone knew. He was going to jail willingly, and Governor Ford had assured their safe conduct. But many of the members were so worried, including myself. I remember the night before he left for Carthage, we climbed the stairs together to kiss the children goodnight. And as he was leaving young Joseph's room, he turned and said, "Take good care of all of them, Joseph, Mother and the children." And young Joseph, blinking back the tears, said, "Yes, Father, I will." Later that night, Joseph and I sat alone, looking out at the windows of the mansion house. And my thoughts were so many. I wondered first how their stay would be at Carthage, and if they would be treated safely, and would they return to us in safety, as they had done so many times before. And then my thoughts went to the unborn child I carried. Oh, would he be able to survive the turmoil and stress into which he would be born? And then Joseph broke the silence with a question. Emma, have you ever seriously considered the true meaning of the word elect? Oh, yes, Joseph. I have often. To me, it means chosen. Well, I suppose, as you once told me, that all of us are called, but only those of us who are willing to answer are chosen. I haven't done very well, Joseph, but I've tried. And then Joseph took my hand in his and told me, Emma, no woman could have done that. Early the next morning, the men began to gather on the lawn of the mansion house, and Joseph kissed me goodbye. And then he jested with the children at the door. We had agreed to remain strong for their sakes. The next few days went about almost mechanically. Remember, I cared for the children, did the housework, and took care of the mending. The day of the 27th was hot and clear, and I remember I just finished doing the evening dishes when I was taking my apron off, and I suddenly became aware of the furious clatter of hoofs coming down the road. And I remember I ran through the door to the gate, and my nephew Lorenzo Wasson flung himself from his horse, yelling, Aunt Emma! Oh, Aunt Emma! Uncle Joseph and Uncle Hiram have just been shot and killed. Don't remember much of the remainder of the evening. Oh, yes, friends filed in and out of the mansion house. But I was struck with shock and grief. It was the following morning that I realized they were bringing the bodies home. I remember loving hands lifted them from the wagons and carried them into the mansion house and into the dining room and laid on the couches. Joseph, your face! say I fainted 5 times that day. Oh, I was concerned with the children of old Mother Lucy. But I had no more strength left in me. And later that night, as I sat alone with the bodies, I cried unto the Lord, "Oh God, why am I thus afflicted? Why am I a widow and my children orphans? Thou knowest I have always trusted in thy law. My husband was my crown, and for him and my children I have suffered the loss of all things. Why then, O God, am I thus deserted, and my heart torn with this tenfold anguish?" I must have cried most of the night, for the sun was just beginning to rise, when I had no more tears left in me. I was able to think more rationally. And I thought, if I had one wish, one thing, would have been that Joseph remain true and faithful to the cause, then be taken quickly home to thee. I was granted that one wish. Joseph was safe with his father in heaven. But I am so alone. Joseph, you were my strength, my security. Without you, what will I do?
Emma remained in Nauvoo and later married Major Charles C. Vitamin. Lucy Mack chose to live with this daughter-in-law in her remaining years and wrote the following tribute. "I have never seen a woman in my life who would endure every species of fatigue and hardship from month to month, from year to year, with an unflinching courage, zeal, and patience to endure. She has been tossed on the ocean of uncertainty. She has breasted the storms of persecution and buffeted the rage of men and devils, which would have borne down almost any other woman." Emma died April the 30th, 1879, in her 75th year. Alexander Hale Smith left this account of his mother's passing. "Just before she passed away, I was at the head of the bed. My mother raised right up, lifted her left hand as high as she could raise it, and called, 'Joseph, Joseph.' She laid her hand on her bosom, and she was gone." Emma's buried beside her prophet husband on the sloping bank of the Mississippi River.
Worldly cares a moment to be wide and deep and pure and holy, even as eternity. From thy pure celestial glory, send to us thy gift divine. With the ancient gospel story, in primeval luster shine. Hence about which you salvation